The Red Robe by Zhou Dedong. I drove my flock of sheep slowly across the empty Gobi grassland, feeling unbearably hollow inside. The grass on the Gobi grassland was half green, half yellow, and the whole world shimmered with heat. This place was cut off from everything now. And then I would pass a pale animal skeleton. After so long under the blazing sun of the Gobi, the bones had already dried out and grown hard. Each time I would walk around it a few times and look it over. I could always tell what kind of animal it had been when it was alive, though no one ever checked whether I was right. The skeleton was hollow like an empty house, and no matter how many times I circled it, I could not find where its soul had gone. I raised my binoculars and looked east, southwest, and north. They were military binoculars of exceptionally fine quality, and with them the Gobi grassland shrank by many times. I was looking for another shepherd. I had been herding sheep for half a year, and he had appeared in my binoculars 3 times. He wore a red robe, so he was impossible to miss, but every time I drove my sheep toward him, he would hurry off towards somewhere farther away, as if he were a mirage that could never be approached. I found it strange. He was at least several miles away from me, and even through the binoculars he was only a blur. How did he spot me? Why was he avoiding me? At last, one day I found the answer. I raised my binoculars and searched slowly across the endless Gobi grassland. Suddenly I caught sight of 2 glints from a pair of lenses. He was looking at me through binoculars too. I shivered, as if I had been caught spying, and quickly lowered mine. The heat haze trembled up from the ground. Through it, everything swayed slightly and seemed a little unreal. The distance grew even farther away. He vanished. But I knew I was still within his sight. He was watching every move I made. On the boundless Gobi grassland, terror slowly bred itself from every direction. Today I did not see him, but I did see a yurt in the distance. I was somewhat startled. That place was a large hollow. The grass there was extremely lush, and I often took the sheep to graze there. I had never seen a yurt before. How had one suddenly appeared? The sunlight was good, and everything around was quiet. There was no sheepfold around the yurt, only an old lail cart and a gaunt horse. No sheepdog. Surrounded by green grass, it looked a little desolate. What was more, its color was odd too, a grass green with excellent camouflage. Against it was the sky, a deep, quiet blue with something almost profound in it. The sheep lowered their heads and walked toward it. I hurried forward and herded them back. I thought the yurt in that hollow looked a little strange. Then I raised my binoculars and kept looking at it. I hoped someone would step out from inside. I wanted to see his face, but no one came out. The yurt's door was hung with a thick curtain, and it stood quietly in the afternoon sun like a masked person. At last I grew tired and lowered the binoculars. I thought maybe it was a family that had just come over from another grassland. A felt tent is the home of horseback peoples. Its defining feature is that it can move at any time. Take down the canopoles, roll up the felt, and off you go in search of better grass. This place was called Jihariktu, and you probably could not find it on a map. It lay on the Jining to Erlian line. That is, if you took the slow train from Jining to Erlianhot and rode across the endless Gobi grassland, you would pass this small station. This stretch of Gobi grassland was called Zillingal, half desert and half grassland. Most people never get here in an entire lifetime. The year was 1989, and there were 68 sheep. I myself was born in the year of the sheep. Those sheep were all very thin, just like me. I wore a military uniform, size 3 trousers and size 2 jacket, a little loose on me. On my shoulder boards were 1 thick yellow stripe and 1 thin yellow stripe, the rank of corporal. I lived in a rammed earth house 3 miles from the company. The night I discovered that yurt, I had a strange dream. I walked up to it. It seemed to be afternoon too, with very good sunlight. The yurt was deathly silent. I lifted the thick curtain and crawled inside. It was very dark inside. I had been in the sun all the time, so my eyes could not adjust to that blackness, and I could see nothing. After a while I gradually made things out. The yurt was empty, with no windows and no rugs on the ground, only grass growing everywhere. A man sat on the grass. He wore a red robe and looked at me stiffly. This yurt was wrong. I turned to leave. "I'm terribly sorry," he said. His accent was strange. I had no idea where it came from. I looked at him, puzzled. "I'm too hungry. I ate all your sheep." As he spoke, he opened his mouth. His teeth were dripping with blood. Then he spat, and out fell a filthy sheep hoof. I leapt out in 1 step. The sunlight was so fierce it made everything I looked at seem blurred. I found that all my sheep were gone. But there were 68 people in red robes sitting neatly in the grass outside. Each of them was holding 2 sheep horns, all staring at me stiffly. About 7 or 8 days later, a herder in Chiharigtu fell ill and was getting an IV drip at our company clinic. I borrowed his horse while I was herding sheep. That same day, I saw the shepherd in the red robe again through my binoculars. I left the flock there for the moment, clamped my legs around the horse's belly, and charged toward him. Out on this dry Gobi grassland, he was a terrifying shadow. I wanted to close in on that shadow. In my naked eye, he grew from the size of a mosquito, to the size of a spider, and then to the size of a bat. He was limping forward, his back to me. I could see his flock was larger than mine. I caught up to him quickly. Suddenly, a huge dog lunged at me, kicking up a cloud of sand. On this peopleless Gobi grassland, when a dog sees a stranger, it is really no different from a wolf. And it did not even bark once. I hurriedly pulled on the reins. The horse was a little wild, turning in place and scraping the ground with its hooves. The shepherd in the red robe slowly turned around and let out a strange shriek. I did not understand it. It sounded like Mongolian, and that vicious dog simply ran back after drawing a circle. He wore a blue belt around his waist and black boots on his feet. Sainu. I guided the horse closer and greeted him in Mongolian. Hello. He was speaking Chinese, of all things. In this area, only a few young people understood Chinese, and even then only a few simple words, just as I knew, only a few Mongolian ones. I immediately noticed that a pair of binoculars hung on his chest, about the same size as mine, but with a somewhat strange design. I guessed they were Russian. His face was dark and red, but well-shaped. He had a mole on the philtrum under his nose. A mole looks a little better when it sits on the chin, but above the mouth it can seem rather fierce. I saw you through my binoculars, I said right out. Is that so? He said with a smile. You saw me too, right? No, I've never seen you. After saying that, he got up and went to drive the sheep. I tugged the reins and rode after him. What's your name, Sukabaru? He said. Sukabaru means tiger in Mongolian. Sukabaru, I want to ask you something. He stopped and looked at me. I pointed toward the big hollow. Is there a yurt over there? He looked in the direction I pointed and said, no. A few days ago I saw one there. You must have been mistaken. A yurt could never be set up in a place that low. The dog was still staring at me with hostility. Pointed ears, long tail, no matter how I looked at it. It did not seem like a dog. I swore that when I got back to the city I would go to the zoo and take a good look at what a wolf really looked like. At the very least, I had to learn how to tell wolves from dogs. Otherwise, this was dangerous. Do you always bring a dog when you herd sheep? He did not answer. His tone suddenly turned mysterious. The grassland has not been peaceful lately. You need to be careful. Then he pointed at the binoculars on my chest and said, you should use them often. If you spot an unidentified person approaching you, run. What exactly is going on? Lately, a madman has appeared. The horse beneath me seemed to be startled all at once. It threw up its front hooves and neighed shrilly. A madman. He keeps a wolf that eats people. My horse reared wildly. While I kept both feet jammed in the stirrups and fought to hold the reins, I shot a terrified glance at that dog and then back up at him. He went on. He wears a red robe. My horse suddenly sprang forward and broke into a run, nearly throwing me off. The Gobi grassland blurred before my eyes, and the wind roared in my ears. Although I had lived on the Gobi grassland for half a year, I was not very good at riding. Every muscle in my body was tense, like an iron bar. I had no mind to think about that strange shepherd. All I could think was that I must not fall off and get dragged to my death. The horse ran for more than 10 miles before it finally slowed to a stop. Once I had collected myself, I looked back, and the shepherd was already gone without a trace. A few days later, I once again drove my sheep toward the big hollow. The sun was still good. The earth shimmered and swayed, and little flying insects buzzed over the dried dung of cattle, horses, and sheep. All the way there I kept scanning with my binoculars. I was protecting myself. I always suspected that shepherd was watching me from somewhere. I was also afraid of running into that madman. If he really existed, then his wolf would tear me apart and swallow me whole. I ran slower than the sheep, and on this bare Gobi grassland there was nowhere to escape. I did not see the madman, and I did not see that strange shepherd. What I saw was that patch of overly lush grass. That was the hollow. I used my binoculars to look for the yurt. Strangely enough, the eerie yurt was gone. I froze there. Everything around me was utterly still as the prehistorical world. Could it never have existed? Had I been dreaming that day? Whenever I herded sheep, I often slept. The whole world of grass belonged to me. The whole world of sunlight belonged to me. When I woke, the sheep had already gone far off, but they would still be within my sight, and I would run after them. I kept walking into that big hollow. After searching for a long time, I did not find the slightest sign of digging. The grass was not even disturbed. It did not look as if anyone had ever been active there. I raised my binoculars and looked in every direction. There was not a single human figure. That kind of place might not see a human figure in 100 years. Only one man, Zhou Dedong, a soldier from Heilongjiang who enlisted in 1987. Sometime later, I once again headed toward that hollow. The moment I saw the pointed top of the earth through my binoculars, I stopped short. Suddenly, I understood. It was a mirage. In other words, the yurt was an illusion. It did not exist at all. I was horrified. Maybe this yurt was a yurt from thousands of years ago with a nomad sitting inside it from thousands of years ago. Popular science magazines say that some soils and rocks seem to have the ability to record sound and images and can replay sounds and scenes from long ago. Ancient records contain many accounts of strange sounds and strange shadows, perhaps caused by geological and atmospheric conditions. No matter how far-fetched those explanations were, that scene from thousands of years ago had now reappeared before me. It could also have been a yurt on another stretch of Gobi grassland thousands of miles away, long since dismantled, and yet it had quietly appeared before me through a mirage. It could even have been a yurt on another planet. God knows what kind of refraction had brought it to this peopleless place. My nature is this: the more afraid I am of something, the closer I want to go to it. I will never turn and walk away. The sheep lowered their heads to graze and headed toward the yurt. I trailed behind them, drawing closer step by step. It did not vanish as I approached. It still stood there quietly. The tighter my heart clenched, the more frightened I became. The curtain over its door was still hanging there, thick and tightly drawn. In my mind appeared several terrifying scenes. 1. I walked through that thick curtain. Inside there were many people, a dozen or so men, women and children. It looked like a family. Their clothes were neither the dress of today's Mongolians nor the clothing of any other grassland people I had ever seen. They were strange, plain, and very simple. They were huddled together, tearing at the flesh of some animal. They were so absorbed that they did not even notice me coming in. I looked around and saw spears made of cast iron, stirrups ground from stone, and then to my shock, I saw a crude bow and arrow. I leaned in for a closer look and was horrified. What they were tearing apart in the middle was a person, a man in ancient Han Chinese clothing. He lay stiffly on the ground, his chest already torn open. I shouted, "What are you doing?" They seemed not to hear me and kept tearing at the man's flesh. I reached out and tapped one of them on the shoulder. I nearly stumbled backward because my hand touched nothing at all. They were only images, non-existent. They were three-dimensional images recorded by nature thousands of years ago. 2. I crawled into the yurt. A man was leaning crookedly against a kono pole. His chest seemed injured and he was bleeding. His face was pale and he was on the verge of death. "What's wrong with you?" I asked. He suddenly said, "What you are seeing now is a mirage. This scene is tens of thousands of miles away. Don't be afraid. In truth, I have long since died and this yurt was long since dismantled. What you are seeing now is the scene of my dying." Seeing me still dazed, he said lightly, "If you don't believe me, come over and touch me. I have nothing at all." 3. I went into the yurt and was stunned at once. I saw several enormous people. Their size was not normal. You could tell at a glance that they were not the same species as I was. They wore cumbersome and strange clothes. And yet, if you said they were monsters, they still looked just like human beings, with eyes, noses, mouths. My God, they all had no arms. I nearly cried out. They gave sly, unpleasant laughs, he, and walked toward me silently, closer and closer. I wanted to run, but my legs trembled and would not move. Then I realized they weren't actually looking at me. In their line of sight, I seemed not to exist. Before long, their bodies overlapped mine, like in a dream. Then, one by one, they crossed through me and walked out of the yurt. I immediately chased after them. One by one, they headed into the distance, up into the ethereal sky, toward the farthest star in the universe. At last, I came to the yurt. It was not a mirage. It was so real that the felt even gave off a strong musky smell. The grass in front of the door was lush, and no path had been trampled out there at all. I stood outside the curtain for a while, then suddenly reached out and lifted it. The light inside the yurt was a little dim. I stepped inside and froze again. It was him. He was still wearing that red robe, with a blue belt around his waist and black boots on his feet. He was sitting cross-legged inside the yurt, as if he had been waiting for me. A dog was lying beside him, staring at me. "You? What's wrong?" His eyes gleamed. "You live here?" "Yes, this is my home." "You? Didn't you say there was no yurt here?" "Did I say that?" "A few days ago I asked you." "You have the wrong person. I've never met you." "Don't you remember?" You also told me that a madman had appeared on the grassland lately, and that he kept a... At this point I shivered and stopped abruptly. I realized they really were somewhat different. At the very least, this man's mouth did not have a mole on it. I suddenly sensed danger and clamped my mouth shut. Go on. What did that madman keep? He pressed. He kept a horse. I blurted out in panic. He laughed at once and said, "Sit down." I sat carefully across from him at a small red lacquered wooden table. I had many questions I needed to sort out. I was utterly out of place on this stretch of Gobi grassland, separated from it by culture, language, and custom. I was like a lamb that had strayed into unfamiliar territory. I thought it over and asked, "What's your name?" "Arslan." Arslan means lion in Mongolian. "Did you just move here?" "Yes. Not long ago." "And then you moved away again a few days later?" He said mysteriously. "You know all that?" I did not answer and kept asking, "Why do you keep moving around like this?" "I'm looking for someone." He leaned forward and said with concern, "You need to be careful. The grassland has not been safe lately." "What's going on recently? A man who looks exactly like me has appeared on the grassland." I shivered. Was the person I had encountered one man or two? "You don't need to be afraid. I'm looking for him. I look for him every day, every year, for all eternity." The more he spoke, the more excited he became. I did not know why. Then he opened the cabinet, took out a pair of binoculars, and said mysteriously, "I search for him on the grassland every day. The whole grassland is under my watch." Just then he stopped and stared straight at the binoculars on my chest. "And I also see that you often use binoculars to look at me, right?" Suddenly I asked, "Do you have a twin brother?" He obviously had never encountered the Chinese word for twin. After thinking it over, he said, "I don't have any brothers." I was speechless. That strange suspicion rose again in my mind that this yurt was not real, but a mirage, an illusion. I quickly looked around, trying to see whether there were any spears forged from cast iron, any stone-ground stirrups, any rough bows and arrows. I saw a cabinet painted with red flowers and green grass. A square mirror hung on the wall, painted with goldfish and lotus blossoms. There were also parched rice, butter, wolfberry grass, books on animal husbandry, and so on. At last my eyes collided with the dog's eyes. It was looking at me listlessly. Its eyes did not look like a dog's at all. If you observe dogs closely, you will discover that no matter whether they belong to poor families or rich families, good families or bad families, all dog eyes are the same, alert, imposing, and righteous. But this one's eyes were different. They were somewhat dull, lacking spirit, with a greenish glint that made them look cruel, cunning, and terrifying. I looked away first. "It's a dog, isn't it?" I asked Arslan as if nothing were wrong. "Who, that one?" "No." I was startled. "Then what is it?" "It's a wolf. A madman. This man was the legendary madman." I was stunned. He reached out and stroked the wolf's bristly head, saying with mystery and delight, "Don't be afraid. When I brought it back from the grassland, it was still a wolf cub. I've raised it for many years now. It doesn't eat people. It eats people. If it didn't, why would I keep it?" I slowly stood up and said in a low voice, "I'm going out to look at my sheep." He seemed not to care what I did. He kept stroking the wolf's head and muttered to himself, "But if I don't give the word, it doesn't dare move." I backed out of the yurt and ran for my life. At night, lying in bed and thinking back on what had happened during the day, the more I mulled it over, the more frightened I became. A strong wind rose. Suddenly, a sheep's desperate bleating came from outside the window. At once I thought there was a wolf. In my rammed earth house there was no phone, no police, no neighbors. Crying for help was useless. Here, everything depended on yourself. I took a kitchen knife with a chipped blade from under the bed. It was a discarded knife from the cook's tent, and I had asked for it. Gripping it tightly in one hand and holding a flashlight in the other, I crept out fearfully. A tall sheep had already leapt out of the pen and run to my doorway, bleating in terror. "Bah! Bah! Bah!" I dodged it and went toward the pen, but it smartly circled around in front of me and kept bleating in terror. "Bah! Bah! Bah!" I thought it had gone mad from fear. I kicked it aside and hurried toward the pen. I had to see whether it was really a wolf. Unexpectedly, that sheep rushed up again and blocked my way, still crying in terror. "Bah! Bah! Bah!" I froze. I immediately realized that this sheep was trying to stop me. I switched on the flashlight and shone it on its face. It suddenly stopped bleating and stared straight at me, those eyes blinking on a fluffy sheep's face and blinking in the flashlight beam. More and more I felt they were human eyes, eyes I knew very well. I was struck dumb with fear. At last the uncanny sheep slowly straightened itself up, slowly shed its sheep's wool, and slowly tore away that fluffy face. I stared fixedly at the strange thing before me. It was him. I could not tell whether he was Sukubaru or Arslan. This was the most terrifying dream ever dreamed on the Gobi grassland. I once again found myself walking across the Gobi grassland. There could never be such a thing as a duplicate in this world. The Sukubaru and Arslan I had met were probably the same person, a madman. The first time I saw him, he had a mole above his mouth. Maybe that had just been some dirt. A lizard stared at me motionlessly from the grass. The world was hot, but the lizard was cool. It caught my attention, and when I looked more carefully, I saw that many lizards in the grass were all staring at me. Suddenly I felt that someone was watching me through binoculars from far away, and that gaze was just like a lizard's. No matter whether it was Sukubaru or Arslan, I was afraid of running into him again. I raised my binoculars and looked out. Through them I saw a red robe coming toward me from far away, with something that I could not tell was a wolf or a dog running in front of him. My legs went weak at once. Terrified, I turned in a circle with the binoculars, hoping to see a herder's tractor or motorcycle passing by, but in the other direction I saw another red robe coming toward me as well. Again with something I could not tell was a wolf or a dog running in front of him. At that point I was certain there really were two red robes on this Gobi grassland. There really were two identical men. They were both walking toward me. I hurriedly drove the sheep toward the company. In that moment I felt finished. Soon I would turn into a bleached skeleton, and under the Gobi sun my bones would grow drier and harder every day. The bones would be hollow, like an empty house. And no matter how many times you circled them, you would never find where the soul was. They were coming. That time I was terrified beyond measure, ran a fever for days, and received IV drips at the company clinic. The military doctor said I kept shouting, "They're coming." That same evening, the company commander received exact news from the border guard troops. Two men had fought on the Gobi grassland, both wounded, and both were sent to Chihariktu Hospital. In fact, it was a highly dramatic story, one that could be written into a full-length novel. I only learned the truth after I left Chihariktu. Let me give you the short version. Sukubaru and Arslan were twins, but they were separated when they were very young and never knew about each other. That was later confirmed by Sukubaru's mother. Arslan lived on another grassland far from here. Once he came to the Gobi grassland near Chihariktu and happened to meet a girl. The two fell in love. Her name was Uyun Chikik. Kichi means flower in Mongolian. Once Uyun Chikib met Sukubaru on the Gobi grassland and mistook him for Arslan. And so by a cruel twist of fate, Uyun Chikig and Sukubaru ended up together. After a brief acquaintance, Sukubaru fell deeply in love with Uyun Chikig, and Uyun Chikij also realized that this man who looked exactly like Arslan was even more attractive to her. Arslan had a silent and irritable temperament. When he learned that Uyun Chikij had fallen for someone else, he drank heavily every day and eventually went mad. The wolf had been raised by him since it was little, and the local TV station even interviewed him about it. He took that wolf with him everywhere, searching for his rival so that he could kill him. By then, Arslan and Uyun Kichige were already married. At last, they collided on the Gobi grassland. That scene was actually very poetic. The desert. Two men fighting a duel for one woman. Or rather, a tiger and a lion fighting over a flower. This story is 100% true, including the wolf. It really happened on the grassland where I herded sheep, back in 1989. If you want more detail, any soldier who served in Chihariktu in 1989 can tell you. That wolf had been tamed by humans from a young age, so much of its animal nature had worn away. It fought the dog to a draw, and in the end both of them lay on the Gobi grassland, bled out, and died. The dog died honorably. After all, it had died together with a wolf. From another angle, the truthfulness of this story is 10%, because in the real story, I was not in it. The end.